The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the city still smelled like wet concrete and something older underneath it, something that never quite dried no matter the season. Ray Callahan stood on the rooftop of Jefferson Hospital with his back to the door and his eyes on Philadelphia. 10 stories below, the streets moved, the way streets always moved at night, headlights cutting through the dark, a siren somewhere losing itself in the distance, people walking fast with their collars up and their eyes down, the way people do when they have learned that looking at things too long gets you involved in them. His hands were at his sides. His left one was clean, his right one wasn't. The leather cut he wore was black and weathered, the Hells Angels patch on the back faded from 22 years of sun and road, and the kind of living that leaves marks you can't explain to people who weren't there. It hung loose on shoulders that used to fill it out differently. His hair was silver white, pulled back still thick. The scar on his left cheek, a souvenir from a bottle fight outside Wilmington in 1983, caught the light from a passing helicopter when he turned his head. He was 68 years old. He didn't feel 68. He didn't feel young either. He felt exactly like what he was, a man who had done something tonight that couldn't be undone, standing in the cold air of an October in Philadelphia, waiting for whatever came next. The door behind him opened. Vic Strand's voice. Low, rough, the voice of a man who had smoked for 30 years and quit 20 years ago and still carried the sound of it somewhere permanent. Vic was 66, built like a fire hydrant, left out in the weather with arms that looked like they'd been carved from something harder than muscle. The burn scars on his right hand, white and twisted, running from his knuckles to his wrist, were visible even in the rooftop dark when he pushed the door open wider. "Ray, cops are coming up." Ray didn't turn around. "Let them come," he said. A pause. Then Vic stepped out onto the roof and let the door fall shut behind him. He didn't say anything else. He knew Ray well enough to know when words were the wrong tool. He just stood there 10 feet back, the way a man stands. When he is keeping watch without making it obvious, that's what he's doing. From somewhere below, another siren started. Then another. Ray looked down at his right hand. He turned it over slowly in the orange light of the city. He looked at it for a longer time in my mind. Then he looked back out at Philadelphia and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. And he had learned a long time ago that talking about a thing you've done doesn't change the shape of it. The door opened again. Dutch Harmon came out. 70 years old, the oldest of the three of them, wearing gold-rimmed glasses that made him look like a retired professor or a parish accountant or anything at all except what he actually was. He stopped when he reached Vic, looked at Ray's back, looked at Vic's face, and stood still with his hands in his jacket pockets and said nothing, because Dutch had learned decades ago that assessment always preceded action, and the assessment was not yet complete. "How bad?" Dutch said quietly. "Bad enough," Vic said. Dutch looked at the door they had come through, then at the city. Then he said in that flat, unhurried voice that had never changed in the 40 years Ray had known him, "Then I suppose we wait." Ray turned around. His face was difficult to read. It had always been difficult to read. 22 years in the Marine Corps will do that to a face, will smooth it down and harden it, and teach the muscles not to broadcast what's happening underneath. But Vic and Dutch weren't reading his face. They were reading his eyes. They had been reading his eyes since 1987, and they knew what they were looking at tonight. "She's going to be all right," Ray said. "Doctor said so." "Then that's something," Dutch said. Ray nodded. His jaw worked once like he was going to say something else. But he didn't. He turned back to the city and looked at all those lights, all those windows full of lives that hadn't intersected with his until this afternoon, this ordinary Tuesday in October, when the three of them were supposed to be on a train to Atlantic City and instead ended up here. The door opened a third time. 2 police officers stepped onto the roof. The younger one had his hand near his belt. The older one, gray at the temples, eyes that had cataloged too many nights to react to one more, looked at Ray, looked at the leather cut, looked at the patch, and made a decision before he said a single word. The decision was, "This is not what I thought it was going to be." "Mr. Callahan," the older officer said. "That's right. We're going to need you to come with us." Ray held out his right hand palm up, showing them what was on it. The younger officer's face did something complicated. The older one's face didn't change at all. "Come on," the older officer said. Ray looked back at Vic and Dutch one more time. Vic gave him a nod, small, the kind that means we've got it from here. Dutch had his attention on the 2 officers, now cataloging them the same way he cataloged everything, quietly, completely, without making it apparent. Ray walked toward the officers and didn't look back. 12 hours earlier, he had been standing in the middle of 30th Street Station waiting for a train, and none of this had happened yet. It was just after 10 in the morning. The station was full of the particular chaos of a Tuesday in October business travelers with rolling suitcases and the distracted, slightly panicked energy of people who are always almost late college students with enormous backpacks, navigating like ships that don't know how to turn families with small children. Older couples moving carefully and looking at the departure boards with the unhurried attention that only comes when you've stopped being in a hurry about things. The ceiling of 30th Street was high and vaulted classical columns running along the main hall light, coming through tall windows and landing on the marble floor in long, pale rectangles. It was a beautiful building. Most people moving through it didn't notice that anymore. They were looking at their phones or at the boards or at nothing at all. Ray noticed. He always noticed things like that, the bones of a place, the way a building told you something about what the people who built it believed was worth building right. He stood near the far end of the main concourse with his back to a steel column and watched the crowd the way he had watched crowds his whole life. Not with suspicion exactly, with the steady attention of a man who had learned that things happen in crowds and that the half second between noticing and acting is sometimes the only half second you get. Vic Strand was to his left, hands in his jacket pockets, jaw working slowly like he was chewing on something he hadn't decided the flavor of yet. He was watching the departure board with the expression of a man who has been personally let down by a piece of infrastructure. Delayed again, Vic said. 20 minutes, Ray said. That's what they said the last time. Then we stand here another 20 minutes. Vic made a sound in the back of his throat. Not agreement, not disagreement. Just the acknowledgement that the situation existed and he was choosing to be irritated by it in a controlled way. Dutch Harmon was 6 feet to Ray's right, leaning against a column with his arms crossed and his eyes moving slowly across the concourse. From a distance, he looked like a man resting. He wasn't resting. Ray had known Dutch long enough to recognize the difference between Dutch at rest and Dutch working, and Dutch was never entirely at rest in a crowded public space. 8 years in military intelligence, followed by decades of doing the kind of work that required you to know what was happening in every room you entered, had left him with an awareness that ran continuously like a system that couldn't be fully shut down. 12 minutes now, Dutch said without looking at the board. They updated it. Vic turned to check. Something. The three of them had known each other for 37 years. They had met in circumstances that none of them discussed in polite company, been bound together by the kind of loyalty that forms between people who have done difficult things in difficult places and come out the other side still standing. They had been Hell's Angels together. The patches on their cuts said that plainly. The other parts of who they were said it less plainly and mattered more. Dutch had been an army medic before he ever put on a patch. 30 years, 2 wars, the kind of institutional knowledge of human damage that left a man permanently calm in emergencies because emergencies were simply the professional condition and there was no point performing surprise at them. Vic had worked in a machine shop in Pittsburgh, before Philadelphia, before the club, before the burn scars on his right hand that he had not explained to anyone for 26 years, and had finally explained to Ray 3 nights ago, sitting at Ray's kitchen table at 2 in the morning with the coffee cold in both their cups. The story was brief and factual in the way Vic told things he didn't want inflated: a fire, a building, a second-floor window, a woman with a baby, and no working fire escape. A drain pipe and 4 seconds of purchase before the heat became definitive. The baby had grown up. Vic had gotten that information from a mutual acquaintance some years back and had not gone looking for more because more was not what the act had been about. Ray had been a Marine, 22 years, 1973 to 1995. He had joined at 18, mustered out at 40, and spent the 3 years after that doing the accounting on what he had given and what had come back to him, and deciding that the accounting was complicated enough to leave alone. He had gone into the club 3 years after getting out, stayed 15 years, walked away from it when Helen got sick. Helen, 38 years. They had met in 1975 when Ray was 20 years old and still knew enough to be surprised by things, and she had been one of those things. Dark hair, green eyes, a laugh that arrived before she intended it and that she never apologized for. She had seen something in him that he hadn't been able to see in himself and had spent 38 years pointing at it until he learned to find it on his own. When the cancer came stage 4, found too late, he had walked away from everything that wasn't her and spent 8 months being the man she had always believed he was. She had died in February 12 years ago in their bed holding his hand, and he still wore his wedding ring, and the wooden box of her ashes sat on his mantle because he could not yet figure out where she would want to go, and until he knew that he wasn't moving her. He looked down at his left hand, at the ring. Then he looked up at the crowd, and he almost missed it, She was moving along the far edge of the concourse close to the wall, the way people move when they've learned that the open middle of a crowd is not a safe place for them. She was older. He put her at 74, maybe 75, with gray hair cut short and neat, wearing a tan coat that had probably been good quality in a previous decade and had lasted because she had taken care of it. Her purse was brown leather cracked at the corners, hanging from her shoulder on a strap she adjusted every few steps. She walked with the careful deliberateness of someone who had fallen before and who carried the memory of that fall in every step she took. Ray's eyes moved past her, automatically scanning on, then came back. Four young men were moving through the crowd at roughly the same pace as the woman in the tan coat. Not together, they were spread out 8 to 10 feet between each of them, moving at slightly different angles with a kind of spacing that read as casual to someone who wasn't paying attention and read as something very specific to someone who was. Ray straightened. He had seen this before. Not here, not in a Philadelphia train station on a Tuesday morning. In places that had nothing to do with pickpocketing or opportunistic crime. He had seen it in places where men moved with purpose and coordination and the specific collective intent of separating something from the larger group before the larger group understood what was happening. The young man at the front of the loose formation was taller than the others, maybe 6'2", wearing a dark hoodie. He had a scar fresh 6 months old at most running from his left ear down to his jaw. The kind of scar that has a story. The kind that makes the person carrying it feel they've earned something, which makes them more dangerous than someone who hasn't yet decided what they're willing to do. Tucked in the lower left of his jacket, small, almost incidental, and embroidered logo. White thread on dark fabric. 2 letters, a shape that might have been a building's outline. Ray squinted. He couldn't read it from here. "Ray," Vic said. Not a question. "I see it," Ray said. "Dutch," Vic said. "Roshadi Bambam," Dutch said. The 4 young men had tightened their formation. The woman in the tan coat had slowed the way people slow when something is wrong and the wrong thing hasn't fully revealed itself yet. She was 40 feet from Ray's position near the top of a wide staircase that led down to the lower platform. The tall young man stepped directly into her path. She stopped, looked up at him, said something Ray couldn't hear across the noise of the concourse. Her face had the careful, non-confrontational expression of someone managing a situation they haven't fully understood yet, but can feel the weight of. The young man leaned close to her and said something. She shook her head. He said it again. Closer this time. She shook her head again and tried to step around him. One of the others moved to block her. Ray was already walking. Not running, not yet. Walking with that quality of movement that 2 decades of military service builds and never fully removes the capacity to cover ground quickly without telegraphing where you're going or what you intend when you arrive. He was 30 feet away when the tall young man put both hands flat on the woman's chest and shoved. He put real force into it. This was not a push designed to intimidate. It was designed to send her down and backward and out of the way, and it did exactly that. Her feet left the floor. Her arms went wide, the purse flying from her shoulder and hitting the marble with a crack like a bat connecting. She went backward in that terrible suspended moment that falls always have the body knowing. Before the mind does that, there is nothing beneath it, and then she hit the top step and her momentum carried her down. She hit the 3rd step with the back of her head. The sound was wrong. Wet and solid at the same time. The sound a thing makes when something inside it gives way that was not meant to give. Ray ran. 68 years old, bad knee, lower back that had opinions about mornings. None of that mattered when the running started because the Marines had built something into him decades ago that lived below the level of pain and did not ask permission from the parts of him that were keeping score. He covered ground the way he always had when it counted fast low, nothing wasted. 20 feet, 15, 10. The 4 young men were at the top of the stairs looking down at the woman. One of them, shorter, wearing gray, had both hands over his mouth and was backing away. The tall one with the scar was watching her with an expression that was calculating, waiting, and something else. Something that looked like confirmation rather than surprise. Like a man checking the result of something he had set in motion. The crowd had opened around the staircase, but no one was going down it. No one was moving toward her. Phones were out everywhere, the bright rectangles of them catching the station light recording. Always recording, as if having footage of a thing was somehow a substitute for stopping it. The tall young man turned and saw Ray coming. He didn't look afraid. He smiled. The smile of someone who has decided that an old man moving toward him is not a problem. "What you gonna do, old man?" he said. Ray hit him in the solar plexus. The punch traveled 6 inches. No wind-up, no telegraph, no dramatic preparation. A straight piston strike from the shoulder directly into the soft center below the sternum, driving the air out and sending the diaphragm into spasm. The young man's eyes went wide. His mouth opened. No sound came out. He dropped to his knees with both hands clutching his stomach, trying to remember the mechanics of breathing. The second one came from Ray's left. Big 6'2", young and angry, and throwing the kind of right hand that people throw when they've watched too many fights and haven't been in a real one. Wide telegraphed, committed too early. Ray slipped inside it close enough to smell the kid's jacket and drove his elbow into the hinge of his jaw. The young man's head snapped sideways. His legs lost the thread. He went down like something with his power cut. The third one had a knife. A folding knife 4-inch blade held point up in the grip of someone who had never used a knife in a fight and had learned the stance from video. The eyes gave it away, scared in a way the face was working hard not to show. Vic's strand materialized. One moment he wasn't there. The next he was coming in from the young man's right without sound or announcement, 6 feet of compact and patient capability in a flannel shirt and leather vest. He took the kid's wrist in both hands and applied torque in the direction. A wrist does not travel until something inside it gave way with a sound like a knuckle cracking. The knife came free without requiring a request. The young man screamed and went down holding his wrist against his chest. The fourth one ran. He made it 4 steps before Dutch Harmon stepped out of the crowd and extended 1 foot. The young man went down face first on the marble and slid his nose connecting with the floor and making a sound that would require a doctor's attention. 15 seconds. 4 down. Ray turned and went down the stairs. She was on her back on the 4th step, arms at her sides, eyes open and not focused on anything. The back of her head had caught the corner of the step, and there was blood, dark red in the station lighting, spreading slowly through her gray hair and tracing down to pool in the crease of the step below. Her chest was moving. Her lips were moving. No sound was coming out. Ray knelt beside her. His knee registered its objection. He ignored it. "Ma'am," he said, not the voice he used for most things. Lower, steadier. The voice he had developed in Helen's last months in the dark of their bedroom when the pain woke her and she needed to hear something that was not afraid of what was happening. The voice that said, "I am here and I am not leaving." "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes moved, traveled across the ceiling of the station and found his face. Focused slowly the way eyes focus after the brain has taken a sudden shock. She nodded, just barely. "Don't move," he said. "You hit your head. Help is coming. I need you to stay still." Above him on the concourse, Dutch's voice was already on the phone with 911, giving the location, describing the injury, answering questions in short, precise sentences, calm in the way of a man for whom crisis has always been simply the professional condition. Vic was at the top of the stairs, arms loose at his sides, positioned between the crowd and the 4 young men, making it quietly clear to anyone reassessing their options that the assessment should not take long. The crowd had stopped moving. People stood in a wide ring, phones recording. The specific modern phenomenon of presence without participation, being somewhere and capturing it simultaneously while the thing itself went unaddressed. Ray did not look at them. He looked at her. "What's your name?" he said. Her lips moved. He leaned closer. "Dorothy," she whispered. "Dorothy Weston. People call me Dot." "Okay, Dot, I'm Ray. You're going to be fine." She looked at him. With those eyes that were focused now, that were seeing him clearly, and doing something with what they saw, assessing the same way you assess a stranger when you have to decide in short order whether they are what they appear to be. Then something in her face settled. "You're going to be fine," he said again. "I'm not going anywhere." She tried to smile. It came out uneven, one side slower than the other. Ray's stomach went cold. He kept his face where it was. He held her hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling, the bones close to the surface the way the bones of older hands are thin-skinned, close enough to feel the pulse in her wrist when you held them. He held her hand and waited for the sirens Dutch had told him were 4 minutes out, and he did not think about the uneven smile or what it might mean, because thinking about it served nothing, and what served something was staying calm and staying present and not letting go. In his peripheral vision, the tall young man was getting his breath back. The diaphragm takes time after a solid solar plexus strike. The young man was still on his knees, hands on his thighs, working his way back to functional. When he finally looked up at Ray, his face had traveled through the shock and landed somewhere harder and colder and more purposeful. "You're dead, old man," he said. His voice was still rough from the interruption and breathing, but the words were clear. "You hear me, dead." Ray looked at him steadily. "What's your name?" Ray said. Whatever the young man had expected, it wasn't that. He stared. "What's your name?" Ray said again. Flat, even, words with weight behind them. "Cade," the young man said. Then with the defiance of someone who wants you to register that they are not afraid, "Cade Rourke, remember it." "I will," Ray said. He looked back at Dot. "I'll look forward to it." The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes, two of them moving through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of people who had processed this shape of situation, not this exact situation, but the category many times before. A woman in her late 20s with her hair pulled back and the flat assessing eyes of someone who had trained herself to see the clinical picture before she felt the human one. A man, slightly older, quieter, already reaching for equipment before he had fully stopped moving. The woman looked at Dot on the stairs, then at Ray, the cut, the patch, the blood on his right hand that was not his, and ran her assessment quickly. "You with her," she said. "I am now," Ray said. She registered that, updated her picture, and turned to her partner. They went to work. Dot's eyes stayed on Ray's face the entire time they worked on her, like he was the fixed point she was using to stay oriented while everything else moved around her. He stayed where he was, not in the way, not touching her, while they needed room, but there. Visible. Present. They put a brace on her neck, checked her pupils, asked her questions, and recorded her answers. Got her onto the stretcher with the coordinated care of people who had done this in worse places than a train station staircase, and they started moving. The female paramedic looked at Ray. "Are you family?" she said. "No." "Then I can't allow you to, please." Dot's voice, barely above a whisper, but clear enough to stop the conversation. She had turned her head as far as the neck brace would allow. Her hand had moved, reaching, finding air. Ray took her hand. The paramedic looked at Dot, looked at Ray, looked at their joined hands, and the particular quality of the grip, the way each of them was holding on to something they needed. She made a decision that the rule book probably wouldn't have endorsed, and that she made anyway because some situations have a logic that supersedes the manual. "Stay out of the way," she said. They loaded Dot into the ambulance. Ray climbed in and sat on the narrow bench across from the stretcher, and the doors closed, and the city began moving past the small rear windows, Philadelphia in the afternoon light, indifferent and continuous. Dot was crying, silent tears running sideways from the corners of her eyes, tracking through the blood and the station grime on her face. She might not have known she was doing it. "Why," but she said. Ray looked at her. "Why did you help me?" He thought about it. He thought about Helen and the wooden box on his mantle. He thought about all the years he had spent being a certain kind of man, and the years he had spent trying to be a different kind, and the distance between those two versions of himself that Helen had spent 38 years helping him close. He thought about Iraq and a family in a house on a side street, and an order he had followed that he had spent 33 years wishing he hadn't. He thought about the specific weight of standing by. "Because someone should have," he said, "when I couldn't be there for someone who needed it. So now I am." Dot closed her eyes, her grip on his hand tightened. The ambulance siren opened up above them, and Philadelphia blurred past the windows, and Ray Callahan, 68 years old, held the hand of a woman he did not yet know and meant every word he'd said. Jefferson Hospital smelled like disinfectant and the particular unmistakable quality of a place where life and death occupy the same room simultaneously and have arranged a working relationship with each other that has removed most of the drama from the process. Ray sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area outside the emergency wing. His knee had stiffened during the ride. His lower back was announcing itself. He ignored both with the practice of a man who had been ignoring them for years. Vic arrived first 20 minutes after Ray. He paced. He didn't say much. When Vic had nothing useful to do, he paced, and he had learned not to apologize for it, and the people around him had learned not to ask him to stop. Dutch arrived 25 minutes after that. He found a chair near the window and sat with his hands folded and watched the emergency room entrance with steady attention, cataloging the staff, the patients, the rhythms of movement, the same way he cataloged every environment he entered. Not with suspicion, simply with the permanent professional habit of a man who believed that knowing what was around you was better than not knowing, regardless of whether you expected to need the information. A doctor emerged from the double doors, young, dark-haired, carrying the bone-deep tiredness of someone 30 hours into a shift that had not been designed for human beings. "Family of Dorothy Weston," she said. Ray stood. The doctor looked at him, took in the cut, the patch, the scar, the hands, made the calculation that everyone made, arrived at the same uncertain place. "I'm close enough," Ray said. She studied him for a moment. Then she gave him what she had: mild concussion, 3 cracked ribs from the fall, a laceration on the scalp requiring 14 stitches, significant pain for several weeks. Recovery was possible, but not alone. Not at her age, not with a head injury. She would need supervision. She would need someone present when she was discharged the following morning. "Can I see her?" Ray said. "She's been asking for you," the doctor said. Room 4 was at the end of a hallway that smelled like linoleum and antiseptic, in the particular quiet of a medical ward at the hour when visiting is technically over. But the staff has more important things to enforce. Ray pushed the curtain aside. Dot was small against the white sheets, the way people always look smaller in hospital beds, as if injury reduces the space they occupy in the world. Someone had cleaned her face. The stitches in her scalp were black against her gray hair, precise and neat. Her eyes were closed. Ray pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. She heard him, her eyes opened. "You came," she said. "Said I would. People say a lot of things." "I'm not people," he said. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the thing that happens to a face just before one. "No," she said quietly. "You're not." They sat without talking for a while. The hospital moved around them. A PA announcement. Footsteps in the hall. The steady beeping of a monitor in the next bay. The background noise of a place that runs continuously because the things it deals with do not schedule themselves. He asked if there was someone to call. Family. Anyone who should know she was here. She said no. She told him about Frank, 32 years, with the NYPD, a husband who came home from things he didn't describe and sat at the kitchen table in a gear she had learned not to interrupt, who had died 4 years ago in the kitchen of their apartment while making coffee. Heart attack. One moment there, the next moment. No warning, no goodbye, just the sound of something falling, and then a silence she had spent 4 years learning to live inside. She told him her sister was in Oregon and that there had been 10 years of distance between them that had calcified into landscape. She told him about the friends who had died, the slow arithmetic of living long enough until she was the last one still keeping the account. Ray listened without offering anything she hadn't asked for. He had learned the difference between listening and waiting to respond. He told her about Helen. About 38 years and what they had amounted to, the specific gravity of a life built with one person who knew all the versions of you and chose to stay anyway. About the 8 months after the diagnosis. About watching someone become smaller and smaller while the light went out of them a little more each week until one morning in February, it went out all the way and did not come back. "I think you'd have liked each other," he said at some point. "Both stubborn, both honest in ways that were sometimes inconvenient." "Frank was like that," Dot said. "He'd go 3 days saying nothing and then say the one thing that made all 3 days make sense." "That's a gift," Ray said. "It is," she said. "I still hear him sometimes when I'm sitting in the apartment. Not words, just the sound of someone else being in a room." Ray nodded. He knew that sound. He knew what it was like when it stopped. She asked about the Atlantic City reunion, and he told her plainly he was where he needed to be, and if the people waiting in Atlantic City didn't understand that they weren't the people he had taken them for. She started to apologize, and he stopped her before she finished the sentence. The detective came at 8 o'clock. His name was Morrison. Mid-50s, going gray, a face that had processed so much of what the world was willing to do to itself that it had stopped registering surprise at any of it. He had a notebook. He asked Dot questions, and she answered them clearly. He asked Ray questions, and Ray answered them the same way. Morrison looked at Ray's hands at the end of it, at the knuckles, at the calluses that never fully left. "You hit that kid pretty hard," Morrison said. "Should have hit him harder," Ray said. "That's assault. That's defense of a third party. Check the cameras. Check the witnesses. I didn't start anything. I finished something." Morrison's face did the thing it did when a person was deciding whether something was professionally appropriate to find amusing. He looked down at his notepad. "We reviewed the footage already," he said. "You're clear." He paused in the way that men pause when what comes next is not something they can say directly. "Those 4 young men. The one you hit, Cade Rourke, he runs with a crew. The South Street crew. This isn't kids playing at something. This is organized, and you embarrassed them on camera." Another pause. "Men like that don't let things go." "I'm not asking them to," Ray said. Morrison looked at him steadily. Something moved through his face, a calculation, a decision being reached, and then amended. He stood, gathered his notebook, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. His back was to both of them. His right hand moved into his jacket pocket and did something Ray could not fully see from where he was sitting. The motion was small and deliberate, Then Morrison turned back his face carrying the same blank professional surface it had worn for the entire conversation. "Get some rest, Mr. Callahan," he said, and then he was gone. Dot was looking at Ray. "What was that?" she said. "A man telling me something he couldn't say out loud," Ray said. She didn't ask what. She looked at the door and then back at Ray with eyes that were tired and clear, and doing the same work they'd been doing since she'd focused on him at the bottom of the staircase reading, deciding, arriving at conclusions she was keeping to herself for now. "This isn't over, is it?" she said. Ray thought about the Sloan Properties logo on Cade Rourke's jacket. He thought about Morrison's careful pauses and the movement of his hand that Ray had not been able to see. He thought about the way four young men had coordinated their positions in a train station around one specific elderly woman, which was not the behavior of opportunists, but of people following instructions. He had been in enough situations to know the difference between a problem at its end and a problem at its beginning. "No," he said, "it isn't." She nodded, not afraid, not resigned, the nod of someone who had known the answer before she asked the question and was simply confirming the count. "Then I suppose," she said, "we deal with it." Ray looked at this woman he had known for 8 hours. This stranger who had stopped being a stranger sometime in the last few hours, who had become something he did not yet have a precise name for but could feel the shape of the weight of it, the warmth. "We deal with it," he said. Outside Jefferson Hospital, Philadelphia moved through its evening without ceremony. Traffic and voices and the city's continuous indifferent motion, all that living compressed into the grid of a place that had been standing long enough to have outlasted most of what people believed was permanent. Ray sat in the plastic chair and held Dot Weston's hand and did not think about the train he'd missed, or the reunion in Atlantic City, or the fact that tomorrow was going to require things from him that he could not yet fully see. He thought about what the nurse had mentioned quietly on her way past, that someone had called the hospital asking about Dot's condition. Not family, not anyone who had given a name. He thought about the logo on Cade Rourke's jacket, 2 letters and the outline of a building stitched in white thread. He still hadn't been close enough to read the full name. He thought about Walt Kowalski, whose name he did not yet know, standing in a dark hallway on a South Philadelphia side street with a manila envelope that had been 4 months in the making, waiting for someone who could do something with what was inside it. He didn't know any of that yet. He was 68 years old and his knee ached, and his back was reminding him of every motorcycle accident and hard floor in sleeping position it had ever accumulated. And he was sitting in a hospital waiting room holding a stranger's hand, and he was, for the first time in a long time, exactly where he needed to be. He reached into his jacket pocket and sent Vic a text. 3 word. "Still here. Stay close." Then he put the phone away and looked at the window at the dark October sky above the city lights and thought about what came next with the same methodical attention he brought to everything that mattered. He did not know yet. But he knew, with the clarity that comes from 68 years of living and losing and choosing and continuing anyway, that he was not going to walk away from this. He had done that once. He was not going to do it again. Dot was discharged from Jefferson Hospital the following morning at 11 o'clock. She walked out of room 4 under her own power that she had insisted upon, and which the nursing staff had eventually stopped arguing with, because there was a particular quality of stubbornness in her that made argument feel like trying to redirect a river with your hands. Ray was waiting in the hall. He had slept in the plastic chair in the waiting room for 4 hours, which was 4 hours more than he'd expected. Vic had gone home at midnight with instructions to be reachable. Dutch had stayed until 2 in the morning, reading his paperback and drinking coffee from a machine that charged $2 for something that tasted like hot brown water, and then had driven home on his softail without being asked to and without making it seem like a decision he was particularly conscious of making. That was Dutch. He was always exactly where he needed to be and never anywhere else. Ray had his jacket on and his phone in his pocket, and the particular alertness of a man who had slept lightly in an unfamiliar chair and woken up with the events of the previous afternoon still running clean and clear in his mind, unprocessed by the kind of deep sleep that softens things. Dot came around the corner and saw him and didn't look surprised. She looked like she'd expected him to be there, which she probably had, because she was the kind of woman who paid attention to what people did rather than what they said they would do, and Ray had given her sufficient data to work with. She was moving carefully. The ribs. Every breath was a small negotiation. She held herself slightly to the right, protecting the left side where the cracked ribs were, and her face had the concentrated neutrality of someone who was in real pain and had decided not to perform it. "You don't have to do this," she said when she reached him. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded the way she'd nodded last night when she'd said, "We deal with it," and they went down to the parking structure where Ray's truck was waiting in the gray October morning. The truck was a 1987 Ford F-150 Blue, where it wasn't rusted 240,000 miles on the odometer, a heater that had opinions about when to work, and a radio stuck permanently on AM. It started on the first turn of the key, the engine finding it its rhythm, with a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a declaration. Dot climbed in slowly holding the doorframe and sat with her spine straight and her hands in her lap because leaning back against the seat put pressure on the ribs. "This is your truck," she said. "It runs. I thought you'd have a motorcycle. I have one of those too. The truck is for when I need to be useful instead of young." She made a sound that was close to a laugh. Close enough. They drove south through Philadelphia. The city was doing what it did in the middle of a weekday morning, which was mostly moving and occasionally not moving at all for reasons that were never entirely clear. Ray drove without rushing. He was not a man who rushed when rushing served no purpose. He watched the cross streets and the intersections and the people on the sidewalks with the same automatic attention he applied to everything, the scanner in the back of his mind running its quiet, continuous assessment. "I need to go to my apartment first," Dot said. "I have medications, Arthur's watch, some photographs." "Frank," Ray said. A pause. "What?" "You said Frank last night. Your husband's name was Frank." She looked at him. Something moved through her face that wasn't embarrassment, exactly, more like the look of someone who has been caught revealing more than they intended and who isn't sure yet whether that's a problem. "Yes," she said. "Frank, I don't know why I said Arthur." "You don't have to explain it. Frank used to say I had two husbands," she said. "The one who existed and the one I was always arguing with in my head. Maybe Arthur is that one." Ray was quiet for a moment. "Helen would recognize that," he said. Dot looked out the passenger window at the row houses going by the corner stores, the empty lots, the American flags. 60 years I've lived in this neighborhood," she said. "Watched it change, fall apart, come back, change again. I don't always know what it is anymore, but I know every block of it." "That's something worth knowing," Ray said. "Is it?" she said. "Or is it just the place where all my memories happen to be stored?" He didn't have an answer for that. He drove. Her building was on a side street that had been at some point in the last decade identified by someone with money as having potential. The buildings on either side had been renovated, their brick cleaned and pointed new windows, installed small plaques by the doors with names that suggested luxury. Her building sat between them like a different era. The front steps cracked the door, needing paint graffiti on the wall beside the mailboxes. The kind of building that had been waiting for someone to decide it was worth fixing and had been waiting long enough that it had started to lose faith in the process. Ray parked and helped Dot out of the truck. She moved toward the building, one hand on his arm, more for steadiness than support, and then she stopped. She was looking at the door, at the lock. It was new. Shining chrome against the old painted wood of the doorframe, a heavy deadbolt that had not been there yesterday morning when Dot had left for the train station. Ray saw it the same moment she did, the same half-second of assessment, the same conclusion. Dot reached into her purse and pulled out her keys. She tried the lock. The key didn't fit. She tried it again. Same result. She stood very still for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Son of a bitch." Ray looked at the lock, then at the windows. Bars on the ground floor, old iron painted and repainted until the paint was more structural than the iron. Nothing on the second floor, but that was 15 feet up and not relevant. "When did you leave yesterday morning?" he said. 8:30, she said. "I had errands before the station." "And the lock was your original when you left?" 20 years, that lock. Frank and I replaced it ourselves." Ray was quiet for a moment, looking at the building, at the new lock, at the Sloan Properties logo that he now understood very precisely. "Who owns this building?" he said. Dot's jaw tightened. "A man named Conrad Sloan. He bought it 18 months ago from the family that held it for 40 years. And before the 18 months, before, she said, we had a super who actually answered his phone in heat that worked in winter, and 12 tenants who had been here long enough that some of them remembered when this street flooded in 1985. Ray looked at her. "And now," he said, "and now there are three of us," she said. "Me, an 83-year-old man on the second floor named Walt Kowalski, who has been in this building since Eisenhower was president, and a woman named Ruth Davenport on the ground floor, whose husband died in a fire in 1989 and who has nowhere else to go." "The others," Ray said, "the 9 who left." She looked at him sharply. He could see her recalculating something. "How did you know there were 9 I didn't, I estimated. There were 9, she said. Sloan bought the building and started making things difficult. Heated in the winters, pipes that went wrong and stayed wrong, a super who stopped answering men showing up to do work that never got finished and made it impossible to be in your apartment for days at a time. One by one, people took whatever buyout he offered and left. People on fixed incomes, people in their 70s and 80s, people who had lived here since there was a different country in a lot of ways. And you 3 stayed, Ray said. We 3 stayed. Ray tried the door himself, locked solid. He stood back and looked at it for a moment. Then he went to his truck. Dot watched him. He reached behind the seat and came back with a tire iron. Jack, she said. Ray, you cannot break in. You have a lease, he said, I'm assuming. 6 months remaining, paid through March. Then this is your legal residence and this lock is an illegal eviction. I'm not breaking in. I'm helping a tenant access her lawful home. Any attorney worth paying would say the same thing. He went to the door, wedged the tire iron between the lock plate and the frame, and leaned into it. The wood was old, and it knew it. It held for maybe 5 seconds out of principle. Then the frame split and the door swung open. Dot stood in the doorway of her own building and breathed in the smell of it. Old cooking and mildew, and something underneath both of those things that wasn't unpleasant, the smell of a place that had been lived in by the same people for a long time, that had absorbed those lives into its walls. Come on, Ray said. Her apartment door was the same situation as the front door. New deadbolt chrome insulent. Ray used the tire iron again, and it took less time because he knew where to put the pressure now. The door opened. Dot stepped inside. Ray stayed near the door and watched her move through the rooms. He had learned a long time ago that there were moments when a person needed to be alone inside their own experience, when another presence was something to work around rather than something that helped. He gave her the space and he watched the hallway. She moved through the kitchen, ran her hand along the counter, into the bedroom. Ray heard a drawer open and then another. He heard her opening the closet, the sound of hangers moving. He heard her stop. A door opened upstairs. Slow footsteps on the stairs, the sound of a cane on each step, the deliberate rhythm of someone who had learned that rushing on stairs was how older people ended up in hospitals. The man who appeared at the bottom of the staircase was 83 years old. Ray could see the age in him, but he could also see through it the way you sometimes can with men who have held themselves a certain way for so long that the posture has become structural. He was tall, thinner than he'd once been, with white hair and thick glasses and a grip on the cane that was firmer than it needed to be, which was not a tremor, but a habit. The habit of a man who had learned that you hold on to things. He looked at Ray, at the leather cut, at the patch. Then he looked at the broken door frame. Evelyn, he said. Dorothy, Ray said. Dot. She goes by Dot. I know what she goes by. I've known her 17 years. The old man's eyes were sharp behind the thick glasses, the magnifying lenses making his gaze seem larger than it was. You're the one from the station, the biker. Ray Callahan. The old man looked at the tire iron in Ray's hand, then back at his face. Walt Kowalski, he said. 2nd floor. Been here 53 years. He paused. Changed your lock 3 weeks ago. I broke in. Called the police when he did it. They told me to settle it in civil court. He made a sound that was almost a laugh and contained no humor whatsoever. Civil court, like I can pay a lawyer on what Social Security sends me. What do you know about Sloan? Ray said. Walt looked at him for another moment, assessing, making the same calculation men of his generation made when they met a stranger who was asking them for information, the calculation of whether this person was someone to trust or someone to be careful of, and the recognition that sometimes those categories overlapped more than was comfortable. He reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and pulled out a manila envelope. Thick sealed the corners worn from being handled. I know quite a bit, Walt said. I've been keeping notes, 4 months, dates, times, names, vehicle plates, photographs. He held the envelope out. I've been waiting for someone who could do something with it. Ray took the envelope, turned it over in his hands, felt the weight of it. I'm going to be honest with you, Ray said. Please, Walt said. I don't know what I can do with this yet, but I'm not going to stand here and tell you it doesn't matter when you spent 4 months collecting it. Walt nodded. There was something in his face that hadn't been there before. Not relief exactly. More like the thing that happens when you have been carrying a weight alone for a long time and someone else puts their hand on it. The weight doesn't change, but the carrying does. Dot came out of her bedroom with a small suitcase. She moved carefully, the ribs making themselves known with every step, but her face was composed. She looked at Walt, and something passed between them that was old and familiar and private. He changed the locks, she said. 3 weeks ago for me, Walt said. He's been moving fast. Ruth, she said. Ground floor. She's in there. She's been in there since yesterday. Won't open her door. Ray looked at Dot. She gave him a slight nod. He went to the ground floor door with Ruth Davenport's name on the faded tape beside the buzzer. He knocked twice. Silence. Mrs. Davenport was, he said. My name is Ray Callahan. I'm a friend of Dot's. She's here. She's all right. You can open the door. A long pause. The sound of something heavy being moved across the floor, a chain being unhooked. The door opened 2 inches, then 8, then all the way. Ruth Davenport was 78 years old, silver-haired, wide-shouldered, with the kind of face that had probably been beautiful and had become something better than beautiful over the decades, expressive, worn in the right places, full of a life that had been genuinely lived. Her eyes were red. She had been crying or had been close to it for a while. She looked at Ray, then at Dot behind him. She stepped forward and put her arms around Dot with a care that was the particular gentleness of a woman who knew about cracked ribs and knew where not to press. I called the police, Ruth said. She was talking into Dot's shoulder. Yesterday when they came and did the lock, the officer said there was nothing he could do on a landlord-tenant issue, that I needed to contact an attorney. I know, Dot said. I pushed a chair against the door. Like that would help. She pulled back. Her eyes found Ray's. You're the man from the train station. Dot called me. She told me what happened. Yes, Ray said. These boys that work for Sloan, Ruth said. They've been coming around for months. One of them, the tall one with the scar on his face, he broke Tom Harrington's car window on the 2nd floor 2 months ago. Tom moved out the following week, said he wasn't going to wait and see what came next. The tall one's name is Cade Rourke, Ray said. Ruth's face did something complicated. He works for Sloan? I believe so. She was quiet, absorbing that. The confirmation of a thing you suspected but haven't been able to prove is a different kind of weight than the suspicion itself. It's heavier in some ways and lighter in others. Ray took Dot's suitcase back to his truck. He put Walt's envelope in the glove compartment. He sat behind the wheel for a moment with his hands on it and looked at the street and thought. He thought about the logo on Cade Rourke's jacket and what it meant about the relationship between what had happened at the train station and what was happening in this building. He thought about timing the eviction lock appearing the day after Dot was attacked, which was either coincidence or escalation, and he had lived long enough to have a considered opinion about coincidence. He thought about Walt's 4 months of notes and photographs and the fact that Morrison had told him to check his camera footage, and then in the doorway had done something with his right hand that Ray had not been able to see fully. He opened the glove compartment and looked at Walt's envelope. Then he took out his phone and called a number he hadn't called in 3 years. It rang 4 times. Yeah, the voice was careful, the way people who work in certain fields learn to answer calls from numbers they recognize, but haven't heard from in a while. It's Ray Callahan. A pause. Ray, it's been a while. It has. I need information. Another pause, longer this time. About what? A man named Conrad Sloan, Philadelphia-based, real estate. The silence on the other end was a specific kind of silence, the kind that has content. Ray, the voice said finally, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me straight. Go ahead. How involved are you in this? Ray looked at the building, at the cracked front steps and the new lock on the old door, at Walt's window on the 2nd floor where the glass had tape over a crack in the corner. Involved enough, he said. Another silence. Longer. I can't help you, and the voice said. And I need you to understand that I'm not saying that because I don't want to. I'm saying it because if you put your hands on Conrad Sloan right now, you are going to destroy 2 years of work that goes well beyond what you're looking at. Ray was very still. What I'm looking at, he said carefully, is a building full of old people being forced out of their homes by a man who is using hired muscle to do it. I know what you're looking at. What you're not looking at is what's behind it. A breath. Oh. The real estate operation is a front. It's been used to move money, significant money from sources that are significantly worse than a predatory landlord. We have been building this for 24 months, and we are not ready to move. And if someone kicks the table before we're ready, every piece of evidence we have gets contaminated, and the people at the top of this walk away clean. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Ray understood exactly what he was being told. He had been told versions of this before in different circumstances in different decades. He understood the logic of it. He also understood its cost. These are old people, he said. I know. One of them is 83 years old and has a broken hand. A pause. I didn't know that. You do now. The line was quiet for a long moment. Ray, don't touch Sloan, I'm asking you. Give me time. How much time do you need? No answer. Ray ended the call. He sat in the truck for a while after that. The street was quiet around him. Someone's television was audible from an open window above. A dog was barking one block over with the perseverance of a dog who is committed to a position. He thought about a night in Iraq in 1991, 3 months after the ceasefire, in a city that had been a battlefield and was learning to be something else and had not fully decided which way that was going to go. He thought about a family in a house on a side street, a father, a mother, 3 children, the youngest, maybe 4 years old. He thought about local men who had come to that house twice while Ray and his unit were nearby, men who wanted something the family didn't have or couldn't give. He thought about the order he had been given: do not interfere with local civilian disputes. Not your jurisdiction, not your problem. He had followed the order. 72 hours later, his unit had found the family, all 5 of them. He had carried that for 33 years, not loudly, not in a way that announced itself. Just the way you carry something that has no place to be put down with you, always in the background of everything else, shaping things you didn't always know it was shaping. He started the truck and drove. That night, Dot slept in Ray's guest room. He had made up the bed himself, clean sheets, extra pillow for the ribs. The window cracked for air because Dot had mentioned she slept with a window open, and that seemed like the kind of detail worth honoring. The room had been used for storage for the last several years, and before that had been empty since Helen died, and before that had been the room where they kept things for guests who visited less and less as they both got older. Ray made tea. Earl Grey, the way Helen had made it, with the bag in for exactly 4 minutes and milk after, not during. He brought 2 cups to the living room and set one in front of Dot and sat down across from her with his, and for a while they didn't say anything. The house settled around them. Old houses always made sounds at night, wood contracting in the cooling air, pipes doing whatever pipes did when you weren't thinking about them, the particular language of a structure that had been standing long enough to have its own voice. Tell me about Iraq, Dot said. Ray looked at her. You mentioned it yesterday, she said, in the ambulance. You said because someone should have helped when I couldn't. I've been thinking about that. Ray turned his teacup in his hands. He looked at the photographs on the bookshelf, Helen in the summer dress, laughing both hands up, trying to block the camera. Helen at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on and a book open, caught mid-page. Helen at their wedding in 1975, 23 years old, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who has made a decision and is completely at peace with it. 1991, he said, after the ceasefire. We were doing patrol work in a residential area, keeping the peace, which was more complicated than it sounds because the peace was still deciding what it was going to be. He paused. There was a family. They were being shaken down by local men. I don't know exactly what they wanted: money, food, possibly. The house itself, possibly something else. The father had nothing to give them, or wouldn't give it. I never knew which. Dot said nothing. She held her tea. My CO told us to stay clear. Local civilian matters, not our jurisdiction. He was following the rules of engagement, which existed for real reasons. I understood that. Ray looked at his hands. So I stayed clear. We all did. And 3 days later, we found that family. Dot was very still. All 5 of them, Ray said. The youngest was maybe 4 years old. The room was quiet for a long time after that. Outside, a car went by, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. I've told 2 people that story, Ray said. Vic and Dutch. That's it, in 33 years. He paused. I don't know why I'm telling you. Because I didn't ask you to, Dot said. He looked at her. You told it because you needed to tell it, she said. Not because I asked. That's different. Ray thought about that. Frank had things like that, she said. 32 years with the NYPD. He never talked about most of them. But sometimes late at night, one of them would just come out. And I learned that the best thing I could do was exactly what I'm doing now. Not ask, not analyze. Just be the person it was said to. Ray nodded slowly. The point is, he said, I don't stand by anymore. Whatever the order is, whatever the logic is. I don't stand by when someone needs help and I can give it. He set down his tea. Your friend with the FBI told me to leave Sloan alone. For reasons that are real. For reasons I understand. But, Dot said, but Walt Kowalski is 83 years old and has a broken hand, and Ruth Davenport slept with a chair pushed against her door. And that building has been someone's home for 50 years, and I'm not going to stand by and watch someone dismantle it because the timing isn't convenient for a federal investigation. Dot was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? She said. I'm going to talk to Sloan, Ray said. Talking hasn't worked. He has lawyers. I'm not going to lawyer talk to him, Ray said. Dot looked at him steadily. She understood what he meant. She was Frank Weston's wife for 42 years, the wife of a man who had worked the streets of New York for 3 decades and who understood the difference between what the law could do and what sometimes needed doing. She understood it in the abstract, and she understood it in the specific, and she was afraid of it for Ray's sake and not for her own. Be careful, she said. Always, he said. She gave him a look that communicated without any particular emphasis that she considered this to be an optimistic reading of the available evidence. Ray made the call the next morning. Conrad Sloan's number came from Walt's envelope, which Ray had spent an hour with at the kitchen table after Dot went to sleep, going through Walt's meticulous notes with the attentiveness of a man reading a tactical brief. Walt was thorough. He was angry in the way that very quiet people are angry, the anger compressed and cold and organized, producing careful documentation rather than action, because action without support felt futile, and Walt was a realist. Sloan answered on the third ring. Sloan? The voice was mid-40s smooth, the voice of a man who was used to talking and used to being heard. My name is Ray Callahan, Ray said. I'm calling about 3 tenants at your South Philadelphia property. Dorothy Weston, Walter Kowalski, Ruth Davenport. You changed their locks. A brief pause. When Sloan spoke again, the smoothness was still there, but something had been added to it, a particular kind of amusement. You're the man who assaulted my employees at the train station yesterday. Your employees pushed a 74-year-old woman down a flight of stairs. The police reviewed the footage. I'm not who they're interested in. My employees, Sloan said carefully, were in that station for their own reasons and had an altercation that I had nothing to do with. And the situation at the property is a legal matter between me and my tenants. Their leases contain clauses about property maintenance obligations that have not been met. I'm acting within my rights. You changed the locks on their doors, Ray said. In Pennsylvania, that's an illegal eviction regardless of what your lease says about maintenance. You know that. Your lawyers know that. My lawyers, Sloan said, are very good. I'm sure they are, Ray said. But good lawyers can only help you if you get to use them. I'm giving you the opportunity to resolve this quietly. Restore the locks, honor the leases, call off Cade Rourke and whoever else you're using to pressure these people. The pause this time was longer. Then Sloan laughed. It was a short, contained laugh, the kind that communicates contempt without committing fully to it. Mr. Callahan, he said, you're a 68-year-old man in a leather jacket calling me from a cell phone. I have significant resources, significant legal counsel, and significant relationships with people who make decisions in this city. You have a tire iron and a grudge. Another pause. Go home. The line went dead. Ray looked at the phone for a moment. Then he called Vic. They met Conrad Sloan's building in Fishtown at 8 o'clock that evening, the 3 Harleys pulling to the curb in front of a glass and steel condominium development that had replaced a warehouse where, according to Dutch, who knew things like this, printing workers had gone on strike in 1937 and held out for 11 weeks. The building had a lobby you could see through the glass front wall marble floors, a reception desk, the kind of interior that was designed to communicate a very specific thing about money and what money meant about the person who had it. Ray had been in enough buildings like this to know that what they were communicating was less a statement about the person inside them than a question directed at the people outside. Do you belong here? The answer for Ray and Vic and Dutch was demonstrably no, which was fine. They waited. Conrad Sloan came out at 9:20, wearing a gray suit that was not off the rack and moving with the particular proprietary ease of a man on his own sidewalk. He saw them when he was 10 feet from his car, saw the 3 Harleys, saw the 3 men in leather cuts, and stopped. His right hand moved toward his jacket pocket. I wouldn't, Ray said. Sloan went still. He looked at them. The calculation was visible in his face, the assessment, the estimation of risk, the comparison of what he was seeing against what he had anticipated and what resources he had available in the next 30 seconds. Mr. Callahan, he said. His voice was controlled. You know why we're here, Ray said. You're trespassing on private property. We're standing on a public sidewalk, Dutch said from Sloan's left, not looking up from his paperback. He turned a page. Sloan's jaw tightened. He looked at Ray. This is intimidation. I'll have all 3 of you arrested. Call them, Ray said. Tell them your illegal lockout is being challenged. We'll all wait together. A pause. You don't understand what you're getting into, Sloan said. His voice had lost some of its smoothness. Not much, enough to notice. Here's what I understand, Ray said. He took one step closer. Not aggressive, not fast, just closing the distance to the range where it was very clear he wasn't speaking for anyone who wasn't standing right in front of him. Walt Kowalski has lived in that building for 53 years. Ruth Davenport lost her husband in the line of duty in 1989 and has lived there ever since. Dorothy Weston was pushed down a flight of stairs by a man wearing your company logo. And I am not a person who is going to stand here and watch you finish what you started. Sloan looked at him. Restore the locks, Ray said. Honor the leases. End it. A very long moment. The street was quiet. A bus moved past on the cross street, its lights sweeping briefly over them. Fine, Sloan said. His voice was flat. I'll look at the situation. Ray held his gaze for another second. Then he stepped back. They walked to the bikes. Ray didn't look back because looking back communicated uncertainty, and he was not uncertain. He heard Sloan's voice behind him, low and quick on a phone call, the words not fully audible, the tone unmistakable. A man who has made a public concession and is immediately making private plans. Vic fell into step beside Ray. That's not over, Vic said. No, Ray said. He's going to come back at us. I know. So why do that? Ray swung his leg over the Harley and settled into the seat. Because I needed him to know I'm serious, and I needed to see his face when he understood it. And now I know something about him I didn't know before. What's that? Vic said. Ray started the engine. The Harley found its voice immediately, that deep, unhurried rumble, the sound of controlled combustion at rest. He's afraid, Ray said, not of us, of something we might find. He looked at the glass building, at Sloan still on his phone inside the lobby, back to them, talking fast. Men who are afraid of exposure act differently from men who are afraid of violence. He didn't threaten us. He reassured himself. Dutch was on his own bike book and his vest pocket helmet buckled. Interesting, he said. They rode home through the October night. 2 hours later, the phone in Ray's pocket rang. He was sitting in his living room with a glass of water and Walt's envelope open on the coffee table, going through the photographs for the third time. Dot was asleep down the hall. The house was quiet the way it got after 10 o'clock, that deep residential quiet that Ray had never fully gotten used to in 12 years of living in it alone. The number on the screen was one he didn't recognize. He answered it. Mr. Callahan, a woman's voice. Brisk, flat, the kind of voice that had learned to be efficient in environments that rewarded efficiency. My name is Briggs, Laura Briggs. I work for a federal agency. Don't say which one on this call. I was given your number by someone who thought we should speak. Ray stood up. Morrison, he said. Don't say names on this call either, she said. Can you meet tonight? He looked at the clock on the wall. 10:47. Where, he said. She gave him a location. A parking structure on Vine Street, 3rd level, 15 minutes. He was there in 12. The parking structure was mostly empty at this hour, a few cars scattered among the numbered spaces, the fluorescent lights doing what fluorescent lights do in empty concrete spaces, which was create a specific kind of illumination that felt less like light and more like the absence of total darkness. Agent Laura Briggs was leaning against a dark blue sedan on the 3rd level, wearing a jacket that had the specific cut of something that covered a shoulder holster, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that assessed him before he'd fully stopped walking. She was in her early 40s. She had the face of someone who had been doing difficult work for long enough that the difficulty had become the baseline rather than the exception, and who had made a kind of peace with that without exactly being comfortable with it. Mr. Callahan, she said, Agent Briggs. I'm going to be direct with you because I don't have time to be indirect, and because the person who gave me your number said you'd respond better to direct. That's accurate, Ray said. Conrad Sloan is being investigated by a federal task force for financial crimes. Money laundering, specifically through a series of real estate transactions that run up the East Coast and connect to organizations that neither you nor I want operating freely in this country. She said it clean and flat, without drama, the way you deliver information to someone you are trusting to handle it like an adult. What you're looking at, the tenant harassment, the illegal evictions, it's real and it's wrong, and it's exactly what it looks like. But it's also a cover operation. The properties don't need to be profitable. They need to be transaction generating. Every eviction, every renovation loan, every property transfer creates financial events that can be used to justify cash movements. Ray thought about what the voice on the phone had told him the previous morning, what he could now hear behind what had been said. How close are you? He said. We need Conrad Sloan to talk, she said. Not about the real estate, about the money. About who gave it to him and what he told him it was for and where it went. If we move on him now, based on what we have, he goes to trial. His lawyers spend 18 months on procedural motions, and the people at the top of this never get touched. She paused. We need him to incriminate himself voluntarily, on a recording that meets evidentiary standards. Ray looked at her. You're asking me to help you set a trap, he said. I'm asking you whether the people in that building would be willing to participate in a conversation with Conrad Sloan that is legally recorded with their consent. She held his gaze. One-party consent, state, Pennsylvania law. If Dorothy Weston or Walter Kowalski or Ruth Davenport agrees to be recorded in a conversation in their own home, everything Sloan says in that conversation is admissible. And if I agree to help you, Ray said, then the situation in that building becomes something federal law enforcement is aware of and is actively managing. Not reactive, active. She paused again. And the other thing, say it. Harlan Webb, she said. Ray waited. Councilman, 12th District. He and Sloan have a relationship that predates the building purchase by 7 years. Webb has been steering development permits, variance approvals, and inspection waivers in Sloan's direction for a significant portion of that time. Webb is also the reason your friend's call was returned with a polite refusal yesterday morning. A beat. And Webb is planning to leave Philadelphia in 36 hours. He has a house in the Carolinas. He goes there every November, and this year he's leaving 6 weeks early. Ray understood what she was telling him. If Webb leaves before Sloan is in custody, he said. Webb is a cautious man, she said. He'll read the situation from a distance, determine that Sloan has become a liability, and there will be nothing connecting him to any of this that we can use in court. He will walk away clean. She looked at him steadily. We have one window. It closes in 36 hours. Ray stood very still in the orange light of the parking structure. He thought about Walt's manila envelope and the 4 months of careful, angry documentation it contained. He thought about Ruth Davenport with a chair pushed against her door. He thought about Dot's head hitting the 3rd step of the staircase in 30th Street Station and the sound it had made and the look on Cade Rourke's face while he watched. He thought about a family in Iraq and a choice he had made in 1991 that he had been explaining to himself ever since. Tell me what you need, he said. Agent Briggs looked at him for a moment. Not warm, not cold. The look of someone who is doing a careful final assessment before committing to a course of action. First, she said, I need to know that you can follow a plan exactly, even when it feels like you should do something different. I can follow a plan, Ray said. Good, she said. Then here's the plan. She talked for 15 minutes. Ray listened without interrupting, which was how he had always listened to briefings completely, without anticipating absorbing the whole picture before forming any response to any part of it. When she was finished, he asked 3 questions. She answered 2 of them fully, and one of them with enough information to be useful. Then he drove home through the empty streets of Philadelphia, thinking about the 36 hours ahead and what they were going to require of him and the 2 people who had been his brothers for almost 4 decades, and the 3 old people in a building on a South Philadelphia side street who had been waiting for someone to come along and do something, and who were now, whether they fully understood it yet or not, going to be asked to do something themselves. He let himself in quietly. The house was still. Down the hall, Dot's door was closed, the light under it dark. He stood in the living room in the dark for a while with Walt's photographs in his hand. He looked at them without looking at them, his mind elsewhere, running through contingencies and failure points in the variables he could control and the ones he couldn't. This was how he had always prepared for things, not by worrying about them, by mapping them the way you map terrain before you enter it, so that when you're in it, the landscape is familiar and you know where the high ground is. Then he looked up at the photographs on the mantel. Helen in the summer dress, laughing, hands up to block the camera. I know, he said quietly to the photograph. I know what you'd say. The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But he thought not for the first time that not answering was also a kind of answer. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for a long time. When he finally did, he dreamed about nothing, which was the best he ever hoped for, and was on a night like this one more than enough. The day before the trap, Ray fixed a carburetor. It was a 1971 Harley-Davidson Sportster that belonged to a man in Manayunk who had inherited it from his father and didn't know what to do with it and had been calling Ray about it for 3 months. Ray had finally picked it up on a flatbed 2 weeks ago before the train station, before any of this had started. It sat on the workbench in his garage with its guts open and its problems visible and solvable in the way that mechanical problems were solvable with the right tools, the right knowledge, and enough patience to work through the things systematically from the outside in until you found what was wrong and corrected it. Ray worked on the carburetor for 2 hours that morning. Dot sat in a lawn chair near the garage door with a cup of coffee and watched him work without talking much, which he appreciated. The ribs were better, not good, but better, the difference between pain that consumed you and pain that announced itself only when you moved wrong. She had slept 8 hours and eaten breakfast, and there was color in her face that hadn't been there the day before. After the first hour, she said, "You're doing this to think." "I'm doing this because it needs doing," Ray said. "You're doing both," she said. He was. He had learned a long time ago that his mind worked differently when his hands were occupied, that problems he couldn't solve sitting still resolved themselves somehow in the background of physical work, as if the act of fixing one thing created the conditions for understanding another. He didn't know the neuroscience of it. He didn't need to. Vic arrived at noon. Dutch was already there, had been there since 10, sitting on an upturned milk crate near the workbench, reading his paperback. They had gone over the plan twice the night before here in the garage, with Briggs's instructions laid out on Ray's workbench like a tactical map. They had asked their questions and raised their concerns and modified two elements that didn't hold up under scrutiny, and Briggs had agreed to both modifications without argument, which was how Ray knew she was actually good at what she did. The plan was this: Ruth Davenport would call Conrad Sloan and tell him she was ready to leave. She would tell him she wanted cash under the table, $10,000, no lawyers, and that she needed him to come in person to sign the paperwork because her eyesight was bad and she didn't trust documents she couldn't go over face to face. The cash offer was the bait. It communicated desperation, which Sloan would find credible and gratifying. The in-person requirement was the mechanism. Walt would be there. Ruth would be there. They would guide the conversation toward specifics. Briggs's team would be outside. Dutch had 3 recording devices. Professional grade, the kind he still had access to through channels he never fully explained and that no one had ever pushed him to explain. 2 would be placed in Ruth's apartment before Sloan arrived, one in the smoke detector above the kitchen table, one behind a framed photograph of Ruth's husband in his firefighter gear. The third Dutch would keep on his person in the breast pocket of his flannel shirt as a redundancy. If the first 2 were found or failed, the third would still be running. Ray would not be in the apartment when Sloan arrived. This was the element Ray had argued about and lost. "Your presence changes the dynamic," Briggs had said. "Sloan knows who you are. He's afraid of you in a specific way, which means he'll be guarded in a specific way. We need him relaxed enough to talk. We need him to feel like he's the most powerful person in that room." "He will be," Ray had said. "Walt is 83, Ruth is 78. Which is exactly why he'll feel safe," Briggs had said. "And when people feel safe, they talk." Ray had understood the logic. He had not liked it, but he had agreed to it because he had told her he could follow a plan, and he kept his word, and those 2 facts were, in his experience, not separable. He would be in Vic's car on the street outside. Dutch would be positioned in the hallway of the building with a clear line of sight to Ruth's door. Briggs's people would be at both ends of the block. Morrison would be off duty and 2 blocks away, which was as close as he could get without compromising his position at the department, and which was enough. The 36-hour window that Briggs had given him had 22 hours left on it. At 2 in the afternoon, Ray put the carburetor back together, started the Sportster's engine, listened to it run for 30 seconds, and shut it off. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked at the bike for a moment. "Clean," Vic said from the milk crate. "Clean," Ray agreed. He put the shop rag down and went inside to make the call to Walt and Ruth. They gathered in Ruth's apartment at 5 o'clock. The space was small and full of life photographs on every surface, a ceramic collection on the windowsill, a braided rug in the center of the living room that was worn in the path people had walked across it for 30 years. Above the fireplace, a large framed photograph of a man in his late 30s in a Philadelphia Fire Department uniform, smiling, standing in front of a truck. The smile of a man who loved his work and didn't know yet what his work would eventually ask of him. Ruth looked at the photograph while Dutch installed the smoke detector device, standing on a step stool with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this in environments significantly less comfortable than a South Philadelphia apartment. She looked at it the way people look at photographs of people they've lost when they think no one is watching. Not with grief exactly, more with a kind of ongoing conversation, a continuous silent accounting with someone who is no longer there to respond. Walt was seated at the kitchen table with his broken hand in a brace and his good hand flat on the table. He had dressed for this in a collared shirt and slacks, which Ray noticed and said nothing about, because he understood the impulse to meet something serious in clothes that took it seriously. Ray sat across from Walt and went through the conversation points one more time. Not a script would sound like a script, and Sloan would hear it. Just the landmarks. The things Ruth and Walt needed to steer toward when the opportunity presented itself. The evictions, the tenants who had left, the money Sloan had offered people to go, the threats, the men he had sent. If he doesn't go there himself, Ray said, you don't push, you let it go. The recording of him arranging the illegal eviction and the cash payment is enough for Briggs's purposes. It doesn't have to be everything. And if he does go there, Walt said, then you let him, Ray said. You don't have to do anything, you just have to be in the room. Walt nodded slowly. His jaw was set in the way it had been set since Ray first met him, that quiet, compressed determination of a man who has been patient for a very long time and has not confused patience with resignation. I've been waiting for this for 4 months, Walt said. I'm not going to fold now. I know, Ray said. Ruth made the call to Sloan at 5:30. Ray listened from across the room. She was extraordinary. She was frightened. The slight quaver in her voice was real because she was a 78-year-old woman making a call that could go badly in ways she understood better than she was willing to let Ray see. But she used the fear rather than hiding it. She sounded exactly like what Sloan would want her to sound like, defeated, pragmatic, willing to take whatever she could get and disappear quietly. Sloan agreed. 9 o'clock. He would bring the papers and the cash. He would need them both to sign. She hung up and sat very still for a moment with the phone in her lap. Well, she said. You were perfect, Ray said. She looked at him with those red-rimmed, steady eyes. Don't let anything happen to Walt, she said. Nothing's going to happen to Walt, Ray said. I mean it. I know you do, Ray said. And I mean it too. Dutch finished with the devices at 6:15. He climbed down from the step stool, folded it, leaned it against the wall, and picked up his paperback. He checked the third device in his breast pocket without taking it out. A slight pat, a glance down, a small nod to himself. Then he looked at Ray. We're ready, he said. The hours between 6:15 and 9 o'clock were the longest Ray had spent in a while, which was saying something because he had spent a significant portion of his life waiting. The Marines were an education in waiting. The club had been an education in waiting. Sitting next to Helen in the last months had been an education in a kind of waiting that made everything before it seem like impatience. He knew how to wait. It didn't make the waiting feel shorter. He and Vic sat in Vic's Silverado on the street outside, parked in a spot that gave them a direct line to the building's front door and the fire exit on the side. Dutch was inside. Ray had Briggs's number dialed and ready. He had his phone in his left hand and his right hand on his knee, not reaching for anything because the whole point of being in the car was to not reach for anything unless it became necessary. You're thinking about going in there, Vic said. No, Ray said. You are thinking about going in there, Vic said again. Ray said nothing. Vic turned to look at him. In the low light of the car, the burn scars on his right hand were visible against the steering wheel, the white and twisted skin that ran from his knuckles to his wrist, 35 years old now. So familiar that Ray had stopped seeing it for most of those years and then started seeing it again. After Dot had asked about it, and Vic had finally told the story sitting at Ray's kitchen table at 2 in the morning with the coffee gone cold. The story was this: October 1989, an apartment fire on a street in Pittsburgh. Vic was 29 years old, working at a machine shop 3 blocks over, walking home. He heard the fire before he saw it. He saw a woman on the second floor before she saw him. The woman had a baby. The building's external fire escape had failed, rusted, the bolts gone a decade past inspection. The front entrance was compromised by the time the fire department arrived. Vic had gone up a drain pipe on the side of the building. He had come back down with the baby and burns on his right hand from a window frame that gave him 4 seconds of purchase before the heat was too much. The baby had grown up and was a kindergarten teacher in Harrisburg now. Vic had gotten the update a few years ago from a mutual acquaintance and had not gone looking for more. He didn't talk about it because it embarrassed him. Not the act itself, but the idea that the act was extraordinary. To Vic, it was arithmetic. There was a baby. He had 2 working hands and a drain pipe. The math was not complicated. Ray had been thinking about that story since Vic told it, about how the same arithmetic applied to different things in different circumstances, and how the people who understood it as arithmetic rather than as heroism were consistently the people who did it when it needed doing. If something goes wrong in there, Ray said, if something goes wrong in there, Vic said, Dutch will handle it until we can get inside. And if Dutch can't handle it, which I sincerely doubt, we go in. He paused. But nothing's going to go wrong. You don't know that. No, Vic said, but I'm telling you anyway because that's what I'm here for. Ray looked at the building, at the light in Ruth's ground floor window. 40 years, he said. What? We've been doing this for 40 years, the three of us. Vic was quiet for a moment. Not this specifically. Close enough. Yeah, Vic said. Close enough. At 8:53, a black Mercedes turned onto the street. Ray sat forward. The car parked at the curb. Conrad Sloan got out. He was wearing a dark overcoat and carrying a leather portfolio, and behind him came two men large, not attempting to look like anything other than what they were. A lawyer followed carrying his own portfolio. 4 people total. Ray texted Briggs, "He's here. 4 with him." The response came back in 11 seconds. "We see them. Hold position." Sloan and his group went through the front door of the building, which Dutch had relocked from the inside. Ray watched the door close behind them. He counted his breathing. In Ruth's apartment, he knew the conversation was starting. Walt and Ruth were doing what they'd prepared to do. Dutch was in the hallway. The door to the stairwell cracked, the third device running in his breast pocket. 10 minutes passed. 15. 20. Ray's phone did not ring. No text from Dutch. No signal from Briggs's team. The Mercedes sat at the curb with its parking lights on. At 9:22, his phone buzzed. Dutch. One word problem. Ray was out of the car before Vic had finished saying his name. He went through the front door of the building at a walk that was just under running. Dutch was in the hallway outside Ruth's apartment, back against the wall, face composed in the particular blankness that meant things had moved outside the planned parameters, and he was recalibrating. He found both devices, Dutch said. Smoke detector in the photograph. He had someone sweep the room before he sat down. Ray stood very still. The third, he said. Still running, Dutch said. He didn't check people. What's happening in there now? He's preparing to leave. He knows it was a setup. He doesn't know who said it. He thinks it was the FBI, and he's telling his lawyer to get ready because he's about to. Ray pushed open the door to Ruth's apartment. The room went still. Conrad Sloan was standing near the kitchen table, his portfolio tucked under his arm, his overcoat still on. He looked like a man who was in the process of executing a prepared exit and had been interrupted in the middle of it. His lawyer was to his left. The 2 large men were near the door. Walt was still seated at the kitchen table. His posture had not changed. His broken hand was still flat on the table, and his good hand was beside it, and his face was the face of a Marine who had sat in a frozen reservoir in Korea in the winter of 1950 and had come to a permanent understanding with cold and discomfort that nothing in the subsequent 70 years had been able to renegotiate. Ruth was standing near the window. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at Sloan with an expression that was not fear and was not resignation and was something older and quieter than either. One of the large men stepped toward Ray. Don't, Ray said. It was a single word delivered at a volume that didn't require emphasis. The large man stopped. Sloan looked at Ray. The smoothness was back in his face, the composed, controlled surface of a man who had navigated this kind of moment before and knew that composure was the primary asset. Mr. Callahan, he said, you've made a significant tactical error coming in here. Ray didn't answer that. He looked around the room. At Ruth's husband's photograph above the fireplace, the frame slightly displaced where Dutch's device had been. At the smoke detector, which Sloan's man had apparently taken down and left on the counter. At the braided rug worn with 30 years of living. Then he pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down. Sloan watched him. I'm not here to stop you, Ray said. A pause. Then what are you here for? I'm here because you've never actually seen them, Ray said. The people you're removing from this building, you've seen units, you've seen a balance sheet, you've seen a renovation timeline, and a projected resale value. He looked at Ruth. You've never sat in this room. Sloan's expression didn't change. This is Ruth Davenport's husband walked into a burning building on March 14, 1989, on a street 12 blocks from here, Ray said. He walked in because it was his job and because it was who he was. He didn't come back out. She has lived in this building for 35 years since that day. This room is what she has of him. He paused. Not the photograph, not the furniture, the room itself, the place where she kept living after he didn't. Sloan's jaw moved. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. Ray looked at Walt. Walter Kowalski came home from Korea in 1953, Ray said. He had been at the Chosin Reservoir. You probably don't know what that is. It was 17 days in conditions that your mind isn't built to process, and he was 19 years old. He came home and he found this building and he built a life in it across 53 years. And the life is the building and the building is the life. And what you are asking him to do is not sign a piece of paper. You are asking him to agree that none of it happened. Walt said nothing. His eyes were on Sloan. Sloan said, I know what it is, Ray said. He kept his voice level, even the voice he used when he wanted someone to actually hear the words rather than react to the delivery. It's business. I understand business. I understand the math of it and the logic of it and the way money moves through the world and why. I'm not asking you to feel something. I'm not capable of making you feel something. He paused. I'm asking you to look at them, not at the unit numbers, at them. The room was very quiet. Sloan looked at Ruth, then at Walt. Something moved through his face. Ray watched it carefully. It was not remorse. He did not think Conrad Sloan was capable of remorse, at least not in the way the word was usually meant. But it was something. The faint, uncomfortable recognition of a man who has been operating at a sufficient level of abstraction that the concrete reality of what he was doing has not been required to present itself in person, and which was now presenting itself in person, and finding that the abstraction did not hold quite as well as it had. The lawyer said, Conrad, we should— The 9 people who left this building, Ray said. He was still looking at Sloan. For Ruth and Walt and Dot. Did you ever meet any of them? Sloan said nothing. Because you sent Cade Rourke, Ray said, and Rourke sent the others. And there were broken windows and spray-painted walls and a woman who'd lived somewhere for 40 years being offered $4,000 to disappear, and I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that you heard about all of that in summaries, numbers, outcomes. Well, he paused. Not people. I didn't instruct anyone to, Sloan started. You didn't have to, Ray said. That's the point, isn't it? You set the objective. You created the conditions. The methods were someone else's problem. That is not— You contracted Cade Rourke's crew, Ray said. Rourke pushed Dorothy Weston down a flight of stairs in 30th Street Station. She is 74 years old and she has 14 stitches in her head and 3 cracked ribs. And she was in that station because she was trying to visit her sister, who lives in Oregon, who she hasn't spoken to in 10 years, and who she was finally ready to call because Frank has been dead for 4 years. And at some point you run out of time for the arguments that seemed important. He stopped. She never made the call. She was in a hospital instead. Sloane's face had changed, not dramatically, not in the way faces change in movies with clear visual telegraphing, but in the small ways that faces change when something has gotten through the surface, a slight contraction around the eyes, a tension in the jaw that was different from the composed tension of before. Ray had watched faces for 68 years. He had learned to read the small things. The cash you offered the tenants who left, Ray said. Where did it come from? The lawyer's hand came back to Sloane's arm. Conrad, stop. I'm asking about the cash, Ray said. The under-the-table payments. The money that didn't go through the property management accounts. I'm curious about the origin of that specific money. Sloan said, the operating accounts. Not the operating accounts, Ray said. You've been paying people in cash. That's a specific choice. Cash leaves a specific kind of record, or doesn't leave one, which is also a choice. The lawyer said more firmly, Conrad, we are leaving. The renovation permits, Ray said. You've been getting them fast, significantly faster than other developers in this district. That's also a specific outcome that requires a specific input. Sloan looked at him. His composure had developed hairline fractures visible only in the eyes. I have relationships with Harlan Webb, Ray said. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Sloan went absolutely still. His lawyer stepped between them. This conversation is over, the lawyer said. Mr. Callahan, you are going to tell Councilman Webb has been managing your permit process for how long, Ray said. Around the lawyer's shoulder directly to Sloan's face. Sloan said nothing. Because if it's been longer than the 18 months you've owned this building, Ray said, then there are other properties, other buildings, other tenants in other cities who had the same experience that these people had and who were paid in the same cash and whose permit timelines look the same way this building's does. He paused. And that's a pattern, and patterns in federal law are not the same thing as individual incidents. The lawyer grabbed Sloan's arm with both hands. We are leaving right now. Sloan allowed himself to be moved toward the door. His face was controlled again, or attempting to be the composure being rebuilt, brick by brick. He stopped at the threshold and looked back at Ray, And in that look was something that Ray had seen in other faces in other circumstances, the look of a man assessing the damage and beginning even now to calculate damage control. "You have nothing," Sloan said. "Maybe," Ray said. And then the front door of the building opened. Laura Briggs came in first badge, visible her team behind her 4 agents moving through the hallway with the efficient, quiet authority of people who have done this enough times to have removed all theater from it. Morrison was behind them off-duty in his own jacket, keeping to the edge. Sloan's lawyer began to speak. Briggs held up one hand and he stopped. "Conrad Sloan," Briggs said, "I have a warrant for your arrest for violations of the Fair Housing Act conspiracy to commit fraud and extortion." She glanced at Ray, then back at Sloan. "Additional charges are pending." Sloan looked at Ray. Ray stood up from the kitchen table. He straightened his jacket. "The third device," Ray said. "In the room you found 2. Dutch keeps a third." Sloan stared at him. "Everything from the couche to Webb," Ray said. "It's all there." The agents moved. Sloan's lawyer began talking at volume. One of the large men put his hands up immediately, which suggested a previous experience with the process. The other was slower but got there. In the street outside, Ray could hear it through the window voices, the sound of a car door, the particular controlled activity of the rest of Briggs's team making contact with Cade Rourke and whoever had been waiting with the Mercedes. Ruth Davenport sat down. Ray hadn't noticed her standing this whole time through all of it because she had been so still. She sat down in the chair by the window, and she put her hands in her lap, and she looked at the photograph of her husband above the fireplace, and she cried. Not with sound, just with tears tracking down her face in the light, the way rain tracks down old glass. Walt Kowalski was already on his feet. He stood next to Ray and looked at the room being processed by federal agents and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Sierfy, brother." "Sierfy," Ray said. Outside on the street, one of the agents was speaking into a radio. Ray heard fragments through the window. "Car 2 Eastern approach subject in custody." He looked out at the street and saw at the far end of the block additional agents around a black SUV that had not been there before, moving with the purposeful efficiency of an operation reaching its conclusion. Briggs appeared beside him. "Webb," she said without preamble. "He came himself. We think he was monitoring Sloan's phone. When Sloan didn't check in at the expected time, Webb came to see what was happening." A pause. "He walked into the perimeter 3 minutes ago. He's in custody." Ray looked at her. She held his gaze. "I want to be clear," she said. "The recording Dutch made is the backbone of the case. What you did in that room drawing Sloan out, that's either going to be very useful or very complicated, depending on how his lawyers approach it." "I didn't threaten him," Ray said. "No," Briggs said. "You didn't." She paused. "Whatever that was, it wasn't what I planned. But it worked. So." She looked across the room at Walt, at Ruth. "They'll be contacted by our Victims Advocate Unit tomorrow. The building is now part of an active federal investigation, which means nothing changes for the tenants while the case is adjudicated. Their leases are protected." "All 3, Ray said. "All 3, she said. She moved back to her team. Ray stood at the window and looked out at the street, at the lights at the city, moving around the perimeter of this thing that had happened in this room on this block, indifferent and continuous. Behind him, Walt was talking quietly to Ruth. Dot, who had come from Ray's house with Vic an hour ago and had been kept outside the perimeter until now, appeared in the doorway. She looked at Ray. He gave her a small nod. She went to Ruth, and the 2 women held on to each other in the way that women who have survived long and difficult lives hold on to each other, not dramatically, not with performance, just with the steady mutual pressure of people who understand the weight that each of them carries. Ray went out into the hallway. Dutch was there, back against the wall, paperback in his hand, the third device in his breast pocket. "Well," Dutch said. "Well," Ray said, "that was not the plan." "No," Ray said, "it wasn't." Dutch was quiet for a moment. "It worked better than the plan," he said. "Sometimes that happens." Dutch turned a page in his paperback. "I wonder," he said, "if we're too old to be doing this kind of thing." Ray looked at him. "Are you?" Dutch thought about it with apparent seriousness. "No," he said, "not yet." Vic appeared at the end of the hallway. He looked at both of them, looked at the activity in Ruth's apartment, looked at Ray's hands, which were clean. "All right," he said. "All right," Ray said. Vic nodded. He leaned against the wall beside Dutch and said nothing else, because nothing else was needed, and because the 3 of them had been in enough rooms together at the end of enough difficult nights to have learned the particular quality of that particular silence. It was not empty. It was full of 40 years of knowing each other, of the accumulated weight of choices made together, And a part of things survived, and things lost, and things that were simply part of the architecture of being these specific men at this specific point in time. Ray leaned against the wall across from them. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about nothing for a while, which was something he was not often able to do, and was in its own way as useful as thinking. It was past midnight when they left. The street was quiet. Briggs's team had cleared. Morrison's car was gone from the end of the block. The black Mercedes was gone. Walt went upstairs to his apartment, moving slowly on the stairs, and Ray watched him go, with his hand near, but not on the railing, and Walt's posture was still what it had always been. Still that fundamental, structural straightness that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with the habit of holding yourself upright because the alternative had consequences. At the second-floor landing, Walt stopped. He turned and looked down at Ray in the hallway below. "Come back tomorrow," Walt said. "I'll make breakfast." "I'll come back," Ray said. Walt nodded and went into his apartment and closed the door. Ruth was still in her apartment. Dot was with her, and they were talking in low voices over tea, and Ray looked through the open doorway at them for a moment. These two women, these two lives, sitting in this room that had absorbed so much of those lives, was into its walls in the light of the lamp, by the window, talking in the easy, unhurried way of people who have come through something and are beginning to process the fact that they've come through it. He didn't interrupt. He went out to the street where Vic and Dutch were waiting with the bikes. They rode home through Philadelphia. 3 Harleys moving through the late October night, the engines finding their rhythm against the quiet streets, past the closed storefronts and the lit-up bars and the dark windows of row houses where people were sleeping, living their lives inside their ordinary structures, the lives they had built, intended, and would continue to tend until they couldn't. Ray's street was quiet. The neighbors' houses were dark. His own house was the way he'd left it. Red brick, white trim, 3 steps up to a front door that he'd been meaning to paint for 2 years and hadn't gotten it to. The small yard, the grass that needed one more cut before winter made the point moot. Vic pulled to the curb. Dutch parked behind him. They sat for a moment in the quiet with the engines ticking as they cooled. "Atlantic City," Vic said. Ray looked at him. "We never made it," Vic said. "The last ride reunion." "No," Ray said. Vic looked at the house. "I think we had one anyway," he said. Dutch had his paperback out. He turned a page. "Better venue," he said. Ray looked at them both, at these two men he had known since before he was the man he was now, since before Helen, since before Iraq, since before the particular shape his life had taken across 68 years and was still taking, still moving, still being written in ways he had not anticipated and was not done being surprised by. "Come inside," Ray said. "I'll find something to drink." They found 3 bottles of beer in the beat of Ray's refrigerator and carried them to the porch and sat in the October cold with their jackets on and the city spread out around them. The lights of it, the sound of it, the continuous motion of a place that didn't stop for any single event, no matter how significant that event was to the people inside it. They didn't talk much. They had earned the silence, and they used it. After a while, Vic said, "That building, those people." "Yeah," Ray said. "We did right by them." "We did." Vic nodded. He looked at his beer bottle. "Helen would have approved," he said. Ray looked at him. "Of Dot," Vic said. "That's what I mean. Helen would have liked her." Ray was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "She would have." Dutch closed his paperback. He looked at the street. "I'm too old to drive home," he said. "Can I take the couch?" "You've never asked before," Ray said. "I've never been this tired before," Dutch said. They went inside. Dot was home when Ray came in, which was how he had started thinking about it in the 11 days she had been in his house home, as in the place she was when he returned to it, as opposed to the place he returned to. He heard her moving in the kitchen, the sound of water, a cabinet opening. She appeared in the hallway as he was hanging up his jacket. She looked at his face. "Read it." "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. She came forward and put her arms around him, not tentatively, not the careful exploratory hug of two people who are uncertain of the territory between them. She held on with the directness of a woman who had decided a thing and was not ambiguous about it, and he held her back with the same directness, and they stood in the hallway of his house that smelled like old leather and motor oil, and the faint, almost entirely faded memory of Helen's lavender perfume, and they held on. After a while, she said against his shoulder, "I called my sister." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "Margaret," she said, "in Oregon. I called her from your kitchen at 9 o'clock. She paused. She answered. Ray looked at her. "We talked for 40 minutes, Dot said. "She's been waiting for me to call for 6 years. She said she didn't know how to start it. I didn't know how to start it. We were both waiting for the other one. She looked at him steadily. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't fallen down those stairs. If you hadn't been in that station. If I'd gotten on my train and gone to Oregon and called her from a hotel room and it had been fine and ordinary and nothing had changed. You don't know it would have been that, Ray said. No, she said. I don't. She paused. But I know what this is. Whatever this is. Her eyes moved briefly to the photographs on the mantel. Helen, in the summer dress, always laughing. I know Frank would have wanted me to have this, whatever this turns into. Helen too, Ray said. She nodded. He looked past her at the mantel, at Helen's photograph, at the wooden box beside it which had sat in that exact position for 12 years, the ashes of a woman who had asked him to be happy, whose last coherent request in this world had been for him to find his way back to something worth living for, and who he had failed in that one specific respect across 12 years of trying. He thought he might not be failing it anymore. He went to the living room after Dot went to bed, and he sat in the chair across from the mantel, and he looked at Helen's photograph. The laughing one. The one where she was trying to block the camera and couldn't quite manage it because she was laughing too hard. She's Frank's wife, he said to the photograph. She's been Frank's wife for 42 years, and she's not trying to be anything else. Neither am I. He paused. But she sat at my kitchen table this morning and drank my coffee without complaining about how bad it is, which you always complained about, and you were right, it is bad. And she pushed her chair against her door because she was frightened and didn't ask anyone to fix that. And she called her sister tonight after 6 years of not calling her. He paused again. She's all right, Helen. She's more than all right. The photograph didn't answer. He hadn't expected it to. But in the silence that followed, he felt something that he had not felt in 12 years, not frequently, not reliably, but tonight in this specific moment with enough clarity to recognize it. The thing that Helen had asked him to find. Not happiness in the simple sense, not the absence of loss or of weight, but the thing underneath happiness. The thing that makes it possible a reason to be here. A reason that today specifically mattered. A reason that tomorrow was something other than just more of the same surviving. He sat with that for a while, then he went to bed. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in April, Walt Kowalski came down from his apartment at 7:30 with a paper bag full of tomato seedlings. He had started under grow lights in his bedroom window all through February and March, and he planted them in 3 containers on his second-floor balcony with the methodical care of a man who had planted things before and knew that the planting was not the point. The tending was the point, the daily returning to something you had put in the ground and chosen to keep alive. Ruth Davenport's door was unlocked when he came downstairs. He knocked and she called him in, and he found her in the kitchen making enough eggs for 2 people. Even though she lived alone, which was a habit she had maintained ever since the building became quiet enough that she had stopped being afraid of the sound of someone knocking at her door. In South Philadelphia, on a narrow street of red brick row houses, Ray Callahan's garage door was open in the April morning. The 1971 Sportster was done and gone, returned to its owner in Manayunk the previous month, and in its place on the workbench was a 1965 Panhead that was going to require significantly more than a carburetor rebuild. Ray stood in front of it with a cup of coffee, assessing. From inside the house through the screen door he'd put up 3 weeks ago, when the weather turned, he could hear sounds. Specific sounds. The kettle, a cabinet, the chair at the kitchen table making its particular noise against the linoleum when someone pulled it out. He stood in the garage doorway and listened to those sounds for a moment. Then he went inside. Dot was at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on and the newspaper open, which she read every morning without exception, start to finish, beginning with the local section and working outward to the world. She had been in his house for 6 months, which both of them had at various points suggested was a temporary arrangement, and neither of them had done anything to change. Her apartment building was still in a legal limbo that would eventually resolve into something. The federal case was moving. Sloan was cooperating in exchange for considerations that Briggs had not fully detailed. Webb was awaiting trial, but the legal limbo was not the reason she was still here, and both of them knew it. She looked up when he came in. The Panhead, she said. Bad, he said. How bad? Better than dead, he said. Worse than I'd like. She nodded and went back to the paper. He poured coffee and sat across from her, and the kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the newspaper and the April birds outside the window, and the furnace ticking in the basement, still older than Ray was still holding on. After a while, he said, Vic wants to try the Atlantic City thing again, in June. Dot turned to Paige. You should go. I will, he said. All 3 of you. All 3 of us, he said. She looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. It was a very specific look, the kind that had been in development for 74 years and had arrived at its final authoritative form sometime in the last decade. It communicated several things simultaneously without requiring any of them to be said aloud. Ray looked back at her. "I'll be here when you get back," she said. "I know," he said. In his bedroom on this nightstand next to the lamp and the alarm clock that he still set every night out of habit, even though he hadn't needed it in 50 years, the photograph of Helen sat in its frame. The same one that had always been there. She was still laughing. She would always be laughing. Ray sat on the edge of his bed that night, the way he sat on it every night, and he looked at her photograph. "I'm doing all right," he said, "in case you were wondering." He turned off the lamp. Outside, the city moved through its spring night. The streets were warm enough now that the windows were open and the sounds came through cars and voices from the bar at the corner, and somewhere in the middle distance, the sound of a motorcycle starting up that deep, unhurried rumble that he had known his whole adult life, the sound of something with a great deal of power deciding to use it carefully. He lay back. He thought about the pan head on the workbench and what it was going to need and the order in which he was going to approach it. He thought about June in Atlantic City and the men he was going to see there and the ones who would be missing who got older and fewer every time, which was simply the arithmetic of living long enough to have people to miss. He thought about Walt's tomato seedlings on the second-floor balcony, which Walt had told him about last week with the particular pride of someone who has decided that even at 83 you plant things for the future. He thought about Dorothy Weston, whose reading glasses were on the kitchen table downstairs, next to the newspaper folded to the crossword she would finish at breakfast tomorrow. He didn't think about anything for very long because sleep came in the way it had been coming for the last 6 months, not easily. Never easily. He was 68 years old and easily was not part of the available options, but without the long wrestling match that had preceded it for the 12 years before, without the particular specific silence that a house makes when the only person in it is the person who is already there. He closed his eyes. The city kept going. Ray Callahan slept. Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some wear old leather and bad knees and a wedding ring they couldn't bring themselves to take off, and they stand at a train station on an ordinary Tuesday in October and see something that other people are walking past and they don't walk past it. And that's the whole thing, really. That's all of it.